Dr. Jinwoo Park felt his stomach drop as his small research pod shook violently. Red warning lights flashed across the control panel while alarms screamed in his ears. Through the cracked viewport, he could see the green canopy of an unknown forest moon rushing up to meet him. The crash came with a thunderous roar of twisted metal and breaking glass. Jinwoo's world went black for several moments. When consciousness returned, pain shot through his ribs and his head pounded like a drum. Smoke filled the cabin and sparks flew from damaged circuits. He unbuckled his safety harness with shaking fingers and crawled toward the emergency exit. The hatch opened with a loud hiss and fresh air flooded his lungs. Jinwoo tumbled out onto soft moss and rolled away from his burning ship. The forest around him was unlike anything he had seen before. Massive trees stretched toward twin suns that hung like orange jewels in an alien sky. Strange bird calls echoed through the branches, and the air smelled of flowers he could not name. Jinwoo pulled out his emergency kit and checked his translator device. The small screen showed only static and error messages. His heart sank as he realized he had no way to communicate with any life forms he might encounter. That was when he heard the growling. Deep, rumbling sounds came from the shadows between the trees. Jinwoo turned slowly and saw them emerging from the forest. They walked on two legs like humans but had the heads and fur of wolves. Their amber eyes glowed with intelligence and hunger. The creatures wore simple leather clothing and carried spears with stone tips. Silver jewelry decorated their arms and necks. The largest one stepped forward, easily 7 feet tall with scars across his muzzle. "Human," the leader spoke in a voice like gravel. "You crash in sacred hunt grounds." Jinwoo was amazed that the creature spoke his language, but then he noticed the small translation collar around its neck. He raised his hands to show he meant no harm. "I am a scientist," Jinwoo said carefully. "My ship had an accident. I mean no trouble." The wolf being's lips pulled back to reveal sharp white teeth. "Sacred grounds are forbidden to outsiders. Ancient law says death to all who trespass." More of the creatures appeared from behind trees and rocks. Jinwoo counted at least 20 warriors surrounding him. Their spears pointed at his chest and their eyes held no mercy. "Please," Jinwoo tried again. "I did not know. I will leave immediately." The leader threw back his head and laughed, a sound like breaking bones. "Your flying machine burns. You go nowhere, human." He gestured to the other warriors. "I am pack leader Thane. You are now prisoner of the Kethvar people." Strong hands grabbed Jinwoo's arms and pulled him to his feet. They bound his wrists with rough rope that cut into his skin. One warrior grabbed his emergency pack while another took his broken translator. Thane studied Jinwoo with cold amber eyes. "Council will decide your fate, human. But first you will see what happens to those who break our sacred laws." The warriors formed a circle around their prisoner and began marching deeper into the forest. Jinwoo stumbled over roots and rocks as they climbed toward a mountain that rose like a gray fang into the sky. The village appeared after an hour of walking. Simple huts made of wood and stone dotted a clearing beside a rushing river. Kethvar cubs played in the dirt while their mothers watched with suspicious eyes. Adult warriors sharpened weapons and tended to large beasts that looked like horses with fangs. All activity stopped when the hunting party entered the village. Every pair of amber eyes turned to stare at the strange human captive. Some of the cubs whimpered and hid behind their parents. The adults growled low in their throats. Thane led the procession to the center of the village where a circle of carved stone seats waited. Elderly Kethvar took their places while younger warriors stood guard around the edges. This was clearly the council of elders who would decide Jinwoo's punishment. "Honored elders," Thane announced, "this human crashed on our sacred hunting grounds. He has broken the ancient taboo." An old female with gray fur and wise eyes leaned forward. "What does the human say for himself?" Jinwoo tried to explain once more about his peaceful scientific mission, but the words seemed to fall on deaf ears. The council members whispered among themselves in their own language, occasionally glancing at him with expressions ranging from curiosity to disgust. Finally, Thane stood and raised his spear. "The council has decided. Human, you will be taken to the Fang Caverns in the mountain. There you will face the test of the Forgotten Cubs." A younger warrior asked, "What are the Forgotten Cubs?" Thane's expression grew dark. 3 orphan cubs who lost their parents in the last territory war. Grief and rage have driven them mad. They attack any Kethvar who approaches. We have tried everything to help them, but they cannot be calmed or trained. The old female elder shook her head sadly. "No one has survived more than an hour alone with those poor creatures. They are lost to us." "Then the human will join them in madness," Thane declared. "If he survives until dawn, we will consider that the spirits have chosen to spare him. If not, justice will be served. The warriors grabbed Jinwoo's arms again and began dragging him toward the mountain path. Behind him, his research pod continued to burn, sending black smoke into the alien sky. Any hope of rescue or escape died with those flames. As they climbed toward the caverns, Jinwoo wondered what awaited him in the darkness ahead. The heavy stone doors crashed shut behind Jinwoo with a boom that shook dust from the ceiling. The sound echoed through the cavern like thunder, then faded into complete silence. He found himself trapped in darkness so thick he could not see his own hands. Jinwoo pressed his back against the cold stone wall and tried to control his breathing. His heart hammered against his ribs as he listened for any sound that might tell him what waited in the shadows. The air smelled of damp rock and something else, something wild and dangerous. Then he saw them. 6 points of golden light gleamed in the depths of the cave like tiny stars. But these were not stars. They were eyes. 3 pairs of eyes watching him from the darkness. A low growl rolled through the cavern, deep and threatening. It came from somewhere to his left. Then another growl answered from his right, higher in pitch but no less menacing. A third voice joined the chorus, this one smaller and more frightened than angry. Jinwoo's hands trembled as he slowly pulled out his small emergency flashlight. The beam cut through the darkness and revealed 3 shapes moving toward him. His breath caught in his throat. They were HFY cubs, but unlike any he had seen in the village. These young ones were thin and ragged, their fur matted and dirty. Their ribs showed clearly through patchy coats that should have been thick and healthy. Scars covered their small bodies, and their eyes held a wildness that spoke of pain and loss. The largest cub stood in front of the other 2. A terrible scar ran across its left eye, leaving the socket empty and twisted. Despite being only as tall as Jinwoo's waist, the cub moved with the deadly grace of a born predator. Its claws, already sharp as knives, scraped against the stone floor. The second cub was smaller but moved with quick, nervous energy. It paced back and forth behind the leader, never staying still for more than a moment. Its golden eyes darted constantly between Jinwoo and the cave entrance, as if looking for escape or expecting attack. The third and smallest cub tried to hide behind the others. This one was clearly the youngest, probably barely old enough to be away from its mother. Its fur was the most damaged and it shook with fear or cold. When the flashlight beam touched it, the little cub whimpered and pressed closer to its companions. The scarred leader took another step forward, its remaining eye fixed on Jinwoo with burning intensity. The cub's lips pulled back to show small but deadly fangs. A growl built in its throat, and its muscles tensed as if ready to spring. Jinwoo knew he had only seconds before the attack came. Moving very slowly, he reached into his emergency pack with one hand while keeping the flashlight steady with the other. His fingers found what he was looking for, a protein bar from his survival rations. "Easy there," he whispered in the gentlest voice he could manage. "I am not going to hurt you." The cubs could not understand his words, but his tone seemed to confuse them. The leader paused, its head tilting slightly as it studied the strange creature that spoke so softly. Jinwoo carefully unwrapped the protein bar, the plastic crinkling loudly in the silence. All 3 cubs tensed at the sound but they did not attack. Instead, their noses twitched as they caught the scent of food. "You are hungry, are not you?" Jinwoo said, still keeping his voice low and calm. "When did you last eat?" He broke the protein bar into 3 pieces, making his movements slow and obvious. The cubs watched every gesture with intense focus. When he tossed the first piece gently toward the scarred leader, the cub jumped back as if the food might explode. But hunger won over fear. The leader crept forward, sniffed the strange food, then snatched it up and swallowed it in one gulp. The taste must have been good because its eye widened with surprise. Jinwoo threw the second piece to the nervous cub, who grabbed it and retreated to a safe distance to eat. The third piece went to the smallest cub, who was too frightened to come forward. The leader picked up the food and carried it back to its youngest companion. As the cubs ate, Jinwoo studied them more carefully. These were not the wild monsters the HFY warriors had described. He saw fear in their eyes, not just anger. He saw hunger and loneliness and pain. Most of all, he saw children who had lost everything and had no one left to care for them. The scarred leader finished eating and looked at Jinwoo expectantly. The human reached into his pack again and found another protein bar. This time, when he broke it apart, the cubs came closer. They were still wary, still ready to run or fight, but the promise of more food was stronger than their fear. Jinwoo sat down slowly on the cave floor, making himself seem less threatening. "My name is Jinwoo," he said softly. "What should I call you 3?" Of course they could not answer, but he decided to give them names anyway. The scarred leader would be brave for the courage it took to protect the others despite its wounds. The nervous one would be quick for the way it never stopped moving. The smallest would be gentle because something in its eyes reminded him of his little sister back on Earth. For the first time since the crash, Jinwoo felt a spark of hope. These were not monsters waiting to tear him apart. They were lost children who needed someone to care about them. And maybe, just maybe, he could be that someone. The cubs settled down a few feet away from him, still watchful but no longer growling. In the darkness of the cavern, human and aliens began the slow process of learning to trust each other. The hours passed slowly in the dark cavern. Jinwoo sat on the cold stone floor, watching the three cubs as they moved restlessly around their prison. He had given them names in his mind: brave for the scarred leader, swift for the nervous pacer, and gentle for the smallest one who tried to hide from everything. At first, the cubs kept their distance. They would come close enough to snatch food from his hands, then retreat to the shadows. But as the night wore on, something began to change. The fear in their golden eyes slowly gave way to curiosity. Jinwoo spoke to them constantly in soft, gentle tones. He told them about his home planet Earth, about the blue oceans and green forests. He described his family and his work as a scientist. The cubs could not understand his words, but his voice seemed to calm them. When his food supplies ran low, Jinwoo shared his water bottle with the cubs. They lapped at the liquid gratefully, and he realized they had been very thirsty. The HFY warriors who threw them in here had not bothered to give them fresh water. As the night grew colder, Jinwoo noticed the cubs shivering. Their thin, patchy fur provided little warmth against the mountain chill. He took off his jacket and tried to offer it to Gentle, the smallest cub. At first, the young creature backed away in fear. But when Jinwoo laid the jacket on the ground and moved away, Gentle crept forward and sniffed it carefully. The jacket smelled like the strange human, but it was warm and soft. Gentle crawled under it and curled up into a small ball. For the first time since Jinwoo had seen the little cub, it looked peaceful. Brave, the scarred leader, watched this exchange with intense interest. The cubs seemed to be thinking hard about something. After a few minutes, Brave moved closer to Jinwoo and sat down just out of arm's reach. It was the first time the aggressive cub had willingly come near without the promise of food. Swift, the nervous pacer, continued to walk back and forth across the cavern. But now, instead of random movement, the cub began to walk in circles around Jinwoo and its companions. This was pack behavior. Swift was guarding them while they rested. Around midnight, Brave began to make soft whimpering sounds. The scarred cub tossed and turned on the hard stone, clearly having bad dreams. Its paws moved as if running, and it made small growling noises that sounded more frightened than fierce. Jinwoo remembered his grandmother Myeong, who had raised him after his parents died in a transport accident. When he was young and had nightmares, she would sit by his bed and hum old Korean lullabies until he fell back asleep. Without thinking, Jinwoo began to hum one of those ancient songs. His voice was quiet and gentle, filling the cavern with melody. The sound seemed to reach Brave even in sleep. The cub's whimpering stopped, and its breathing became calm and steady. Swift heard the humming and stopped pacing to listen. The nervous cub sat down near Jinwoo, its head tilted in curiosity. Even Gentle poked its head out from under the jacket to see where the beautiful sound was coming from. Jinwoo hummed for almost an hour, cycling through every lullaby he could remember. The cubs seemed hypnotized by the music. One by one they moved closer to the human who sang in the darkness. When Swift started pacing again, Jinwoo had an idea. He pulled out his flashlight and began moving the beam across the cavern walls in slow patterns. Swift's eyes immediately locked onto the moving light, and the cub began to follow it with intense focus. "Good tracking," Jinwoo said softly. "Your parents taught you well." He made the light move faster, then slower, creating a game that used Swift's natural hunting instincts in a positive way. Instead of pacing from anxiety, the cub was now moving with purpose. The exercise tired Swift out in a healthy way, and eventually the cub lay down beside Jinwoo, panting but relaxed. As the night continued, Jinwoo found himself thinking about these three orphaned cubs. They had lost their parents in a war, just as he had lost his own family in an accident. They were alone and frightened, trying to survive in a world that seemed hostile and uncaring. "Your parents were brave warriors," he told them, not knowing if they understood but hoping they could feel the love in his voice. "They fought to protect their pack and their territory. They would be proud of how strong you have been." The cubs listened to his words with serious expressions. Brave's scarred face seemed less fierce when Jinwoo spoke about the cub's parents. Gentle crept out from under the jacket and came to sit near the human's feet. Even Swift stopped its endless movement to focus on the gentle voice. But your parents would not want you to be alone, Jinwoo continued. They would want you to find a new pack, a new family to care for you. Pack means never having to face the world by yourself. As if they understood his meaning, the three cubs began to arrange themselves around Jinwoo. Brave settled down with its head resting on Jinwoo's lap, the scarred eye closed in trust. Swift curled up against his right side, finally still and peaceful. Gentle crawled out from under the jacket and snuggled against his left side, small paws gripping his shirt. For the first time in months, all three cubs slept deeply and without nightmares. Jinwoo stayed awake, watching over them and feeling a strange warmth in his chest. Somehow, in trying to comfort these orphan creatures, he had found healing for his own wounded heart. As the first rays of dawn began to filter through cracks in the cavern ceiling, footsteps echoed from outside the stone doors. The cubs woke instantly and rose as one unit, positioning themselves protectively between Jinwoo and the entrance. They had become a pack and they would defend their human packmate with their lives. The first light of dawn crept through the mountain peaks as pack leader Thane led his warriors up the winding stone path to the Fong Caverns. Their heavy boots echoed against the rocks in a steady rhythm that had marked the death march of many prisoners before. Thane carried a large cloth sack over his shoulder, along with several smaller bags. The other warriors bore shovels and burning torches. They had come prepared to collect what remained of the human and give him a proper burial, as was the custom even for enemies who died with honor. "Do you think he lasted the full night?" asked Warrior Fong, a young fighter with silver fur and nervous eyes. This was his first time serving on a death collection duty, and his stomach felt sick with worry. "No one has ever survived more than 2 hours with those cursed cubs," replied Elder Warrior Stone, his gray muzzle scarred from many battles. The human was brave to face his punishment without begging, but bravery cannot stop claws and fangs. Thane said nothing as they climbed higher. He had seen many prisoners enter the Fong Caverns over the years, and he had collected the remains of all of them. Warriors, hunters, even other Kethvar who had committed terrible crimes, none had survived the test of the mad cubs. The cubs had once been normal young ones with bright futures. Their parents were respected warriors who died defending the pack's territory from invaders. But grief and trauma had broken something inside the young minds. They attacked anyone who came near, including healers and caretakers who only wanted to help. The pack had tried everything. Wise elders attempted to counsel them. Skilled trainers worked to discipline them. Even other cubs were brought to play with them and help them remember how to be part of a group. Nothing worked. The three orphans remained wild and dangerous, lost to madness and rage. Finally, the council had decided to use them as a form of execution. It seemed like a cruel twist of fate, but at least the cubs' suffering might serve some purpose. Prisoners would face them as a test of courage, and the cubs would have prey to hunt. It was not a perfect solution, but it was the only one anyone could think of. As they reached the cavern entrance, Thane held up his hand to stop the group. "Remember," he said quietly, "we do not know what state we will find the body in. The cubs may still be feeding. Light your torches and be ready to drive them back if needed." The warriors nodded and raised their flaming brands. The thick stone doors that sealed the cavern were designed to contain the most dangerous criminals. It took 4 strong warriors to move each door, and the grinding sound of stone against stone filled the morning air. Thane peered into the darkness, torch held high to illuminate the depths of the cave. He expected to see the usual scene: scattered bones, torn clothing, and 3 cubs with blood on their muzzles. Instead, he saw something impossible. Jinwoo Park walked calmly out of the shadows, his clothes dirty but intact. His face showed exhaustion, but his eyes were clear and alert. Most shocking of all, 3 cubs walked beside him in perfect formation. Brave moved on Jinwoo's left, the scarred cubs remaining eye-focused and intelligent rather than wild with rage. Swift paced on the right, no longer showing the nervous, frantic energy that had marked its behavior for months. Gentle walked slightly behind, still small and cautious but clearly comfortable in the group. The cubs moved together like a trained unit. When Jinwoo stopped walking, they stopped. When he turned his head to look at something, they turned their heads in the same direction. This was not the chaotic, violent behavior the warriors had expected to find. Warrior Fong dropped his torch in shock. "Impossible," he breathed, stepping backward until he hit the stone wall behind him. "Those cubs have killed every person who entered that cave. How is he still alive?" The other warriors stared with wide amber eyes. Some gripped their spears tighter as if ready to fight. Others simply stood frozen in disbelief. What they were seeing went against everything they knew about the mad cubs. Thane's mind struggled to process what his eyes were showing him. These were the same cubs who had attacked him personally when he tried to remove them from the cavern months ago. They had left deep claw marks on his arms and legs before he managed to escape. The healers said he was lucky to survive. But now those same deadly cubs were protecting the human prisoner. When the warriors stepped forward with their weapons, all three cubs immediately moved to shield Jinwoo from potential danger. Brave's lips pulled back to show fangs, but this was clearly a defensive warning, not the mindless aggression they had shown before. Swift positioned itself to cover the group's right flank, while Gentle took the left. They worked together like experienced soldiers who had trained for years as a unit. Their movements were smooth and coordinated, showing intelligence and purpose. How? Thane's voice came out as barely a whisper. His hands shook as he stared at the scene before him. How did you survive? How did you do this? Jinwoo looked up at the towering pack leader with tired but determined eyes. Despite spending a night in a cold cave with 3 dangerous predators, he stood straight and met Thane's gaze without fear. The human's clothes were wrinkled and dirty, but he bore no claw marks or bite wounds. His hair was messy and his face showed exhaustion, but there was something else in his expression, a kind of quiet strength that had not been there the day before. They did not need another warrior, Jinwoo said simply, his voice calm and steady. They needed a parent. The words hit Thane like a physical blow. A parent. The pack had tried everything except the one thing the cubs truly needed, someone to love them and help them heal from their terrible loss. The great council chamber buzzed with whispered conversations as Kethvar from across the territory gathered to witness something unprecedented. Word had spread quickly through the village that the human prisoner had not only survived the night with the mad cubs, but had somehow transformed them into a functioning pack unit. Elder Nara, the oldest and most respected of the pack mothers, sat in her carved stone chair at the center of the council circle. Her fur had long since turned silver with age, and deep lines marked her weathered face. She had raised countless cubs over her many years, but even she had given up hope for the 3 orphans in the cavern. Pack leader Thane stood before the assembly with Jinwoo at his side. The 3 cubs, Brave, Swift, and Gentle, had refused to be separated from their human pack father and sat calmly at his feet. Their transformation was obvious to everyone present. The wild, aggressive creatures were gone, replaced by alert but peaceful young ones who looked to Jinwoo for guidance. Honored elders and respected warriors, Thane began, his deep voice carrying across the chamber. We have witnessed a miracle. This human has accomplished what our greatest trainers and wisest healers could not. I ask him now to share his methods with us. Jinwoo stepped forward nervously. Speaking to a crowd had never been easy for him, and these alien predators were far more intimidating than any academic conference he had ever addressed. But when he looked down at Brave, Swift, and Gentle, he found the courage he needed. I am not a warrior or a trainer, Jinwoo said, his voice quiet but clear. I am a scientist who studies behavior. When I saw the cubs, I did not see monsters or threats. I saw children who were hurting. He paused to gather his thoughts, then continued. On my world, we have learned that young ones who experience terrible loss need time to heal their hearts before they can learn to be strong. We call this emotional healing. A younger warrior named Claw raised his hand. But how do you heal emotions? We can bandage wounds and set broken bones, but how do you fix a broken spirit? Jinwoo knelt down and gently stroked Brave's scarred head. The cub leaned into his touch with obvious trust. First, you must show them they are safe. Not just from outside dangers, but safe to feel their pain without being punished for it. The cubs were angry because they missed their parents, he explained. They attacked others because they had no other way to express their grief. Instead of trying to stop their anger, I helped them understand it. Elder Nara leaned forward with interest. How did you do this without words? They do not speak your language. Touch, tone of voice, and patience, Jinwoo replied. I shared my food with them to show I cared about their needs. I hummed songs to calm them when they had nightmares. I made games that let them use their natural instincts in positive ways. He looked around the circle of listening faces. Most importantly, I never tried to replace their parents or make them forget their loss. Instead, I helped them honor their parents' memory by becoming the strong, loyal pack members their mothers and fathers would have wanted them to be. Warrior Stone, an old fighter with many scars, shook his head in confusion. But they attacked every Kethvar who approached them. Why did they accept you? Jinwoo considered this question carefully. Perhaps because I was not trying to train them or fix them. I was simply trying to understand them and give them what they needed: safety, food, warmth, and someone who cared about their pain. Swift got up and nuzzled against Jinwoo's hand, drawing soft chuckles from the watching crowd. The nervous, aggressive cub was now calm and affectionate. Elder Nara wiped tears from her ancient eyes. We thought only strength could forge cubs into warriors, she admitted, her voice heavy with regret. We believed that hardship would make them tough. We never considered that healing must come before hardening. Your way has wisdom, Thane acknowledged. But can it work with other damaged cubs? We have several young ones who have been difficult to handle since the border wars. As if summoned by his words, small faces began to appear at the edges of the council chamber. Other young Kethvar, drawn by curiosity about the ceremony, crept closer to get a better look. Some were orphans like brave, swift, and gentle. Others showed signs of trauma or behavioral problems. Jinwoo noticed a small female cub with a missing paw hiding behind one of the stone pillars. Another young male with patchy fur and nervous eyes peered around a warrior's legs. A third cub, barely old enough to walk, sat alone in a corner with vacant, hopeless eyes. There are so many, Jinwoo whispered, his heart breaking for all the wounded young ones who had no one to help them heal. Pack leader Thane rose from his ceremonial throne and removed the heavy necklace of carved fangs that marked his authority. The jewelry was ancient, passed down through generations of pack leaders. To offer it to an outsider was almost unthinkable. Dr. Jinwoo Park, Thane declared in a voice that rang through the chamber, you have given our lost children what we could not hope in healing. I name you Pack Brother, Cub Whisperer, and friend of the Kethvar people. As Thane placed the sacred necklace around Jinwoo's neck, brave, swift, and gentle pressed close to their human pack father with obvious pride. The weight of the carved fangs felt heavy on Jinwoo's shoulders, but it was a good weight, the weight of belonging and responsibility. Stay with us, Thane requested, his fierce amber eyes now soft with hope. Teach us your ways of healing. Help us save our wounded young before we lose any more to madness and grief. Jinwoo looked down at his 3 cubs, then at the hopeful faces surrounding him throughout the chamber. His original research mission had ended in a crash, but perhaps this was where he was meant to be all along. These children needed him and maybe he needed them too. His voice was steady when he answered. I will stay.